My name is Marissa Hale, and for the past 3 years, I've paid my parents' mortgage every month like clockwork, one $500 wired directly to the bank. I also cover the electric, the gas, and their internet when it gets cut for non-payment, which is often. I refill their fridge once a week. When the car insurance lapsed, I added it to my own policy. It adds up to nearly $200 a month. Quiet, steady support that no one talks about. It started when Dad lost his job at the plant. After 25 years, they handed him a severance check and a box of his things. My mom, who'd never worked full-time a day in her life, started picking up more hours at the library, but it was never enough. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage when they finally called me, not to ask, but to inform. We're about to lose the house, Dad had said flatly, like it was my problem to solve. And I did. I didn't hesitate. I packed up my apartment in Raleigh and moved back to Asheville, rented a 2-bedroom townhouse 15 minutes from their place, and started sending payments. At the time, I thought maybe this would fix something between us. Maybe the daughter they barely acknowledged would finally be seen. But the thank you never came, not in any way that mattered. Zach, of course, was still their pride. My younger brother could FaceTime twice a year, and he'd be praised for checking in. He lived in Phoenix, now worked some sales job he half explained at Christmas, and yet somehow remained the center of their emotional universe. I was doing fine, they told the rest of the family. Marissa's always been so ambitious. They said it like a flaw, like working long hours, earning a good salary, and staying unmarried made me some strange species of woman they couldn't quite understand. Some nights I'd sit in my car after dropping off their groceries, watching their porch light glow from the curb, and feel more like their accountant than their daughter. No one asked how I was doing. No one offered to lighten the load. I carried it alone every month, every dollar, every expectation. And still, it was never enough. This year, I told myself would be different. It wasn't like this came out of nowhere. The signs had been there all along, scattered across my childhood like red flags I was too hopeful to heed. I still remember my high school graduation valedictorian, full scholarship to UNC first in the family to make it that far. I scanned the bleachers after my speech looking for my parents. They never showed. Zach had a track meet that day, a regional semifinal. Mom said she lost track of time. I waited in my cap and gown alone, holding a bouquet I bought for myself. Years before that, she forgot to pick me up from math club because Zach had baseball practice across town. I stood in the school parking lot for 2 hours in the rain. When she finally arrived, she said, "Why didn't you remind me this morning?" as if remembering her daughter was a shared responsibility. I didn't argue. I learned to carry umbrellas. Even recent holidays had a way of reminding me where I stood. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, I brought the entire meal to their house. Roasted turkey, homemade stuffing, fresh pies. I carved, plated, cleared. Dad took one bite and muttered, "It's a little dry." Last year, Mom invited my ex Daniel to dinner without telling me. Her explanation, I thought, maybe if you saw him again, you'd both remember what you had. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. I left before dessert. Still, I couldn't shake the habit of trying. This year, Family Day, our town's more inclusive take on Thanksgiving, would be held at my new condo. I just moved in a 2-bedroom with crown molding and sunlight that poured in across the hardwood floors each morning. It felt like a fresh start. Maybe they'd see me now, see what I'd built. I started planning 2 weeks in advance. I clipped recipes, designed a seating chart, ordered cloth napkins in muted gold. I researched wine pairings and called 3 stores before I found Dad's favorite Pinot. The guest list was short. Mom, Dad, Zach, and his new girlfriend, Alyssa. I'd never met her, but Zach said she was chill, which could mean anything. I added a vegan side dish just in case. The grocery total came out to 368 donuts, 24s. I didn't flinch. I arranged the receipt in a drawer next to the rest evidence of effort no one ever asked for. As I laid out the linens the night before, I told myself it would be different this time. They'd walk in and see the care in every detail, the warmth in every corner. they'd sit down to a table I made beautiful for them. And maybe they'd finally say thank you. The first knock came right on schedule. I opened the door to see Mom holding a bakery box. Pumpkin pie, she announced with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I know you said dessert was covered, but I thought we could use a backup. I thanked her and gestured toward the kitchen. You can put it on the counter next to the sweet potato tart. She stepped inside and gave the dining room a quick scan. You used the white plates. I always thought the blue ones looked warmer for the holidays. These feel corporate? I bit the inside of my cheek. The white ones are all I had a full set of. She gave a distracted nod and moved toward the kitchen, already lifting the foil on the casserole dish I'd spent hours perfecting. You're not using my stuffing recipe, she asked, her brow furrowing. I brined the turkey this year, I said, keeping my tone light, and tried a cornbread stuffing with apples and sage, just something new. Well, I hope your father doesn't mind experiments. You know how traditional he is. I poured her a glass of Chardonnay and handed it over before retreating to the stove. She settled on the couch and began flipping through the TV channels until she landed on the Macy's parade. I checked the time. Zach was 15 minutes late. He arrived 10 minutes later with Alyssa, a small woman with curly hair and kind eyes who handed me a bouquet of yellow roses. These are beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. Our pleasure, she said warmly. Your place is gorgeous. Can I help with anything? Before I could answer, Mom squealed from the couch. Zach, honey, look at you. That Arizona sun must be treating you well. Doesn't he look great? Marissa Zach grinned, taking the attention as easily as breath. The company's expanding and my numbers are up. It's been a good quarter. I poured wine for everyone and Alyssa followed me to the kitchen. Everything smells amazing, she whispered. This must have taken you days. Just a few late nights, I said. Dad showed up last holding a 6-pack of domestic beer. Hard place to find, he grunted by way of greeting. You really ought to have better signage for visitors. I texted directions. Yesterday, I said, reaching for the 6-pack. Well, smells good in here anyway, he added, which was the closest thing to a compliment I'd heard from him in years. He handed off the beer and made a beeline for the living room. As I basted the turkey, I overheard him mutter, "She's gone all fancy on us this year. Must be trying to impress someone with all that money." Mom offered a half-hearted herald in protest, but didn't correct him. By 1 o'clock, everyone was seated. The table looked like something out of a magazine: roasted turkey, glazed ham, sautéed green beans, 3 types of potatoes, and fresh rolls. I had planned it down to the wine glasses gleaming under the chandelier. Dad reached across the table. Let's say grace. We bowed our heads. Lord, he said, thank you for bringing our family together today. We're especially grateful Zach made the trip and for Alyssa joining us. We ask your blessing on this meal and on our family bonds, which matter more than any material success. Amen. I kept my eyes closed a second longer than the rest, not from reverence, but disbelief. Not a single word about the home, the meal, the effort. When I looked up, Alyssa's eyes met mine. There was a flicker of something recognition, maybe pity, but she said nothing. Dinner passed in waves of conversation I barely heard. Between the clink of silverware and sips of wine, Dad and Zach traded updates about football work and some documentary they both half-watched. Alyssa asked thoughtful questions which my parents barely acknowledged. Mom occasionally tossed in a compliment always aimed at Zach, never at the food or the host. I kept my head down, passing dishes, refilling glasses, laughing when expected. When Alyssa turned to me and asked how work had been, I opened my mouth to answer. But before I could get a word in, Mom spoke over me. Oh, she's still at that firm, always glued to the computer. It's all numbers right. Not nearly as exciting as sales. I forced a smile. Actually, I was promoted last month. Senior portfolio manager. I'm overseeing a $300 million account now. Alyssa's eyes widened. That's incredible. But Dad just scoffed. Numbers on a screen. Not like real work. I set my fork down. My work is very real. Those numbers represent people's savings, their retirements. I take that seriously. Sure, he said. And I'm sure it pays well, which is why I don't get why you're always griping about helping us out. When have I ever griped? I asked. Your mother told me you mentioned the mortgage being due, like we didn't know. I turned to Mom. She stared at her plate, rearranging her green beans. I said it needed to process early because of the holiday. That's not griping. Dad leaned back in his chair. You always bring up money, Marissa, always waving it around like it makes you special. Let me tell you something. Paying bills doesn't make you family. The words hung in the air, thick and deliberate. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Zach looked away. Alyssa's fork froze mid-air. I felt something in me stretch and then tear. I looked at Dad. You're right. I stood slowly and steadily, placing my napkin beside my plate. Let's see how family handles it then. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice sharper now. I didn't answer. I walked to my desk in the corner of the room, opened my laptop, and pulled up the banking app. Marissa, Mom said quietly, "Don't be dramatic." I clicked into the mortgage autopay screen and hit cancel. Confirmed. Next electric water internet. Cancel. Dad stood up. What the hell are you doing? I turned around. If paying bills doesn't make me family, then let Zach take over. $9,000 a year. He's the son you're proud of, right? Mom looked stricken. Zach opened his mouth, but no words came. I closed the laptop. Dinner's over. No one moved. I walked back to the table and picked up my wine. The silence wasn't awkward. It was complete. Solid. And as I took a slow sip, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. They left without another word. One by one, they collected their coats, their pride, and their silence. Dad walked out first, muttering under his breath. Mom lingered by the door, staring at me as if trying to summon a version of me she could still control. Zach said nothing. Alyssa looked back, once something apologetic in her expression. Then the door closed, and I was alone. The apartment felt louder in their absence. I gathered the plates, slowly stacking them at the sink, scraping food into the bin, methodically erasing the evening. I wiped down the table last, clearing the cranberry stains, and the final traces of hope I hadn't realized I still carried. My phone lit up before I made it to bed. First a text from Dad, "You've crossed a line. You'll regret this." Then another. "This is how you treat your own parents." I didn't answer. I turned off notifications, knowing it wouldn't matter. At 1:17 a.m., Mom left a voicemail. Her voice was trembling, theatrical. "After everything we've done for you, after all we sacrificed, you embarrass us like this." Another message 10 minutes later. "Your father isn't well. He can't handle this kind of betrayal." She was already rewriting the night. I stared at the ceiling for hours, waiting for the guilt to crawl in. But it never came. By morning, my building's front desk called. A neighbor had reported a disturbance, someone trying to open my apartment door. The description was familiar. When I checked the peephole, no one was there, but I knew he had been. Dad still had a copy of the old key I used before the locks were changed. He must have tried it, hoping I hadn't thought to protect myself from him. The noise must have startled someone down the hall. They called the cops. An officer came by to ask if I wanted to press charges. I didn't. Not yet, but I filed the report. Gave them his name, his voice, the pattern. Then I packed a small bag, booked a room at the Marriott off I-26, and left the apartment behind for the night. I didn't trust what they'd do if I stayed. Not after what I'd taken from them. Not after they realized just how much I really controlled. By the time I checked out of the hotel the next morning, the narrative had already shifted. Mom had wasted no time. I opened my phone to a string of missed calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. A text from Aunt Diane blinked at the top of my screen. "Marissa, how could you do this to your aging parents? They're heartbroken. Your mother says you've been under a lot of stress and aren't thinking clearly. We're all very worried. Worried." That's the word they use when a woman draws a line. There were more screenshots of a group chat where cousins speculated about what was wrong with me, whether I was on medication, whether the pressures of that big career had finally caught up. The version of me being passed around wasn't angry or hurt. She was unstable, selfish, cold. I put my phone on silent and drove straight to work. If there was one place I could still count on feeling competent, it was behind my desk. But even there, the edges blurred. Jennifer, my supervisor, knocked softly on my office door around mid-morning. She stepped inside with her usual calm authority, closing the door behind her. "I wanted to check in," she said gently. "Security mentioned your father tried to access the building yesterday." I looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry if that caused trouble. There was some tension after the holiday." "No need to apologize," she said. "I just want to make sure you're safe. We have emergency housing stipends available if you need time away from home, and if you'd like to work remotely for a few days, we can accommodate that." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak for a moment. "Thank you." She reached for the door, then paused. "You're valued here, Marissa. Just in case you need the reminder." It stayed with me long after she left. I sat back in my chair, the artificial calm of the office around me, and thought about what it meant to choose myself. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt raw. But I also felt something else, weightless. Let them talk. Let them build their version of me, padded with denial and accusation. I had stopped building mine on their approval. And for the first time in my life, I was starting to believe that was enough. The message came mid-afternoon, just after my third client meeting of the day. They said, "You cut them off." Is that true? Zach's name flashed on my screen like it had 100 times before, though never for anything that mattered. I stared at the words for a long moment before typing back. Yes. For 3 years, I paid it all. Maybe it's your turn. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, I didn't know it was all of it. They just said you were helping with some bills. I let out a bitter breath. Some bills. That's how they'd framed it. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries. Nearly $30,000, I wrote. They never mentioned that. No, they didn't. A pause. Then I'm sorry. Another message followed a few minutes later. I set up auto pay for the utilities. I can't afford the mortgage, but I'll cover what I can. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel relief or resentment. Maybe both. "Thank you," I sent back. The words felt foreign but right. Then came the one that dropped my stomach. "You should know? The house is already in foreclosure. They're 3 months behind." I sat back, pulse spiking. What I've been paying. They used credit cards to cover other stuff. Maxed them out. Loans, too. They're in way deeper than they let on. The silence in my office became heavy. I closed my eyes. All this time, while I'd been sacrificing vacations, new clothes, weekends, while I was doing everything I could to keep them afloat, they'd been sinking the ship anyway. And not once had they told me the truth. "I'm sorry," Zach sent again. But this time, it felt different. Less like routine politeness, more like understanding. A crack in the pedestal he'd stood on for decades. "They told the family I abandoned them without warning," I wrote. "I set Uncle Rob straight," he replied. He was shocked. Said if he'd known, he might have stepped in. I looked out the window at the street below, people walking, living lives untouched by this slow unraveling. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But for the first time, it felt like Zach was really seeing me, not as the bitter older sister, but as the one who'd carried everything while they looked the other way. And maybe now he was ready to carry some of it too. The envelope was tucked between an electric bill and a coupon flyer, my name written in a script I recognized instantly. My mother's handwriting, small, controlled, familiar. I stood at the kitchen counter, holding it, not sure if I wanted to open it or throw it away. I waited until after dinner, after the dishes were done and the apartment was quiet. Then I sat at the table, the same table where everything had finally cracked open and broke the seal. Marissa, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I wanted you to know I've been thinking a lot about you, about us. I never saw how unfair we were. It was easier to love the one who didn't demand truth. Zach was simple. He didn't push. You saw through things. You made it harder to pretend. I told myself you were fine, that you didn't need as much, that your strength meant you didn't feel the hurt. But I see now that I mistook your silence for resilience. I'm sorry. It went on short, but without excuses. No mention of stress or dad or how hard it had been for them. Just her voice quiet and direct for the first time in a very long time. I folded the letter and took it to my next session with Dr. Lambert. She read it silently while I sat on the couch, arms crossed tight across my chest. It's the first time she's said any of it, I said when she finished. Dr. Lambert nodded. That's something. Maybe not everything, but it's not nothing. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything yet, she said, but it's okay to let in what's real, even if it's late. I took the letter home and slid it into the back of a drawer I didn't open often. It didn't fix anything, but it didn't feel like manipulation either, and for now, that was enough. The table looked different this time. Same plates, same lighting, same spot by the window, but now it was filled with laughter. Open hands, passing dishes, and the steady hum of people who didn't expect me to earn my place. Amber brought her famous garlic bread. Alyssa arrived early to help plate the roasted vegetables. Zach came with a bottle of wine and a quiet kind of gratitude I hadn't seen in him before. No one commented on the linens or asked about the cost of the meal. They asked about my week. They listened. When the plates were half cleared and the candles had burned low, Zach raised his glass. To the ones who show up, he said, looking around the table, not just the ones who share our blood. Everyone clinked glasses, and I looked around at the circle I had built, not inherited, not tolerated, but chosen. The room glowed not because of the chandelier or the wine, but because no one in it needed me to prove my worth. And for once, I didn't need to prove it either.